So, how many of you know somebody that has diabetes? Raise your hands. All right, so a lot of you. How many of you guys can tell me if it's type 1 or type 2? Okay, not too many of you. That's okay, because not many people know the difference. And especially with nowadays, seeing as how more and more people are becoming diagnosed with diabetes, it's really important to know the difference between the two. I'm going to start off with the basics of both type 1 and type 2. So basically what diabetes is your pancreas, right here on this, stops producing insulin. And what insulin does is it breaks down the sugar that you intake throughout the day, and it turns it into glucose. And in turn, the glucose is your form of energy for your cells. So, and that insulin comes in these little vials just like this. These things are expensive. I'm going to pass it around the class so you guys can get a look. Just be careful with that. Yeah, so the insulin in type 1, the pancreas doesn't produce any insulin at all. So that's when you have insulin like that, you got vials of insulin, and you have to do shots or the pump, as I showed in my previous speech. And then with type 2, the pancreas still produces insulin. It either doesn't produce enough or the body rejects it. So at that point, they're still, they don't have to take the insulin like that. They either take it, they can take it in pill form, or sometimes they do have to take shots depending on the severity of the resistance of insulin. That being said, insulin is the key to diabetes. That insulin will help you regulate your glucoses, makes it so you can eat more of a variety rather than limit what you have to eat. With glucose is what diabetics, that's how they regard to their blood sugar level. So what diabetic is basically trying to do is keep their glucose levels in between two numbers. Mine, personally, I keep mine in between 150 and 200. Now what that means is it's a reading of basically how much sugar is in your bloodstream. So there's two give me the word. There's two different types of glucose. You can have a high or a low. If you have a high, you want to give yourself a higher dose of insulin to bring that back down, because the insulin is breaking down the sugar, and it'll eventually bring your glucose level back down to normal. When it's low, that's when you have too much insulin, and you don't have the sugar to make up for that insulin. So what you need to do is give your body more sugar, and that'll even out your glucose levels. Now with that, symptoms of diabetes. Basically, before you're diagnosed, you'll notice irritability, especially with juvenile diabetes, type 1. You'll notice they'll become very irritable. They'll start going to the bathroom a lot, become dehydrated, losing weight fast, and that's just the pre-diagnosed symptoms, and it's pretty much the same for type 2 as well. But someone who knows they have diabetes, if you see them with irritability, you still get it. That's a symptom of when your glucose is high. They'll become very irritable, dehydrated, going to the bathroom. So the same kind of symptoms as when you're undiagnosed. But just if you ever see a diabetic like that, that probably means their glucose is high. And then when a diabetic's glucose is low, you could get dizzy, very lethargic, and could possibly pass out or go into seizure. I've actually had a seizure before. When I was 8 years old, I woke up one night and paramedics were at my bedside, and I didn't know what was going on. But what had happened was my glucose got too low in the middle of the night, and when my mom came to check on my glucose, I started going into a seizure, so she had to call the fire department and everything, and whole big spiel. But that's worst case scenario. With that, there's very many treatments. It's a very treatable disease, which is great. Makes life a lot easier. For type 1, most treatment begins with, let me go back. With both, the glucometer, I just call it a glucose machine. This thing right here, I'll send this around too. That gives you your reading, which I was talking about earlier. You basically just prick your finger, get a little blood sample, put it on a test strip, and it gives you your reading. So that tells you where you're at. This right here is an insulin pump. That gives you insulin on a steady basis, and it also gives you insulin if you need more, if your glucose was high. So, and you can also take shots too through syringes, but the pump is much more desirable just because you don't have to deal with doing shots 3 times a day. And then treatment for type 2, glucometer is where you start out, and then you can either do shots, like I said earlier, depending on the severity, and then doctors will prescribe pills if they need extra help getting their glucose levels down and whatnot. But the most important treatment of both types of diabetes is a well-balanced diet and exercise. That is the best thing for a diabetic to do. If they're just sitting around doing nothing, their glucose levels are going to be all out of whack. And yeah, so now that you guys know that, you can tell the difference between type 2 and type 1 diabetes.